We're in part 2 of Jesus flipping the script. And we have this amazing AI image. I love AI. I love playing around with it. And it is an image of Jesus flipping the script. And so we're getting into how does he flip the words around? And last week we continued with Jesus on his journey to destiny. Jesus is on his final journey towards Jerusalem, towards the cross. It's a thing that Scripture had always been about. And the Pharisees come to Jesus while he's in Judea, and they attempt to put him on trial in front of the people. They want to try to box him in on what he believes, because when you can box someone in, you can then box them out. And the Pharisees ask him a question relating to one of the 3 most prominent views of divorce. An endless debate, miles of theological battle lines, lifetimes upon lifetimes had been put into war over 4 verses in Deuteronomy. And that's it. It's 4 verses. And the Pharisees' first question that we looked at, let me put the slide up. The Pharisees' first question is, isn't it true that it's lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause? And we saw last week that Jesus' reply is not an answer, but it's a reply that we are meant to wrestle with, and a reply that actually circumvents Moses. In his reply, Jesus does what he so often does. He shifts the battlefield from where his opponents want to fight to what's really important. He will not engage in debate over rules about what is the right way for things not to go right. So often we can get caught up on the wrong part of a matter. And this is what's happened to the Pharisees. We considered last week the Pharisees have been caught up on trying to figure out the intent for what was never intended. And so Jesus goes to Genesis to point to what was understood as the original purpose of marriage. Marriage is 2 humans becoming one human unit. Jesus says that to have a talk about marriage ending, we need to go to the beginning purpose of marriage. The beginning principle of marriage was for the permanency of a single unit of humanity that's created in marriage. That's it. But the reality is that in our humanness, we simply end up not being successful in meeting intent. Humans don't always meet what they're intended to be and to do in all kinds of areas. And that's going to include marriage sometimes. To put this in other words, the battleground upon which the Pharisees want to fight. They want to fight over rules for the successful way to fail. Jesus shifts the focus, though, from coming up with perfect rules for an imperfect ending to marriage to see what is actually the perfect intent for marriage, while leaving room for failed marriages due to our imperfections. And the Pharisees walk right into the trap. They move to the battlefield of Jesus rather than Jesus fighting on their battlefield. They double down on holding to the words of Moses. They say, oh yeah, then why did Moses command us to get divorced? When Jesus says from Genesis that divorce was never intended, they go, oh yeah, if divorce wasn't intended, why did you tell us to get divorced through Moses? Why did God tell us to get divorced? And Jesus responds, oh, Moses didn't command it, but he did allow it. Why? Because you men are hard of heart. Divorce was not built into things to be a right way to go about things. Divorce is rather the failure of things. And where things fail due to our human weaknesses, Moses treated you with a graceful concession. He said, I know this is how things are going to go sometimes. So he was graceful to your weaknesses. There's zero way, though, to make what is not right into right through the right rules around what's not right. It doesn't make sense. It gets convoluted. It doesn't work this way. The only way to work this then, the only way you can work with imperfect people who are inevitably going to fail to meet the intent at times, is to gracefully meet them in their weaknesses, to gracefully concede to imperfections along the journey. And so here we get a glimpse into how Jesus views Moses and the law. Moses did not give a law by which divorce is right or is commanded. Moses, rather, he signaled that where we're too weak, grace will meet us with concession, the concession that's needed to keep us going towards achieving what we're intended for. Jesus turns Moses from strict lawgiver into a messenger of grace, even though the law held no grace. Now, last week we left off considering that Jesus is confronting empowered men. Men have come in their place of religious power to speak of their place of legal power over women. And Jesus is going to push back on them pretty hard. Once we look at this entire exchange, like I said last week, one might consider that we are learning about divorce, but the greater topic at hand appears to be how men relate to women. Jesus' real intent in this conversation seems to be to reduce men and empower women. And he's going to escalate it in a second here when we get to the topic of eunuchs. Now, as the male Pharisees, they come to Jesus, they wield a law that held women as men's property. They're subjected to men's perceptions and whims. If a man perceived that he didn't like his wife anymore, he could divorce her. If a man perceived that he was jealous of his wife, there were certain things in the law that he could take his wife to task, essentially, on these things. And Jesus, though, is going to elevate women to the seat of power. And he's going to put wives in the driver's seat. The men have claimed that if they find a flaw, any flaw with their wife, even this flaw that their wife simply has failed to keep their attention over the years. She just hasn't done enough work on herself to keep me interested, and I now find someone else interesting. I can leave her. The man is empowered to divorce the wife. That was the old way of doing things, though, and Jesus says that it was not because of a flaw with women that Moses actually gave you divorce. The flaw was on the man's side, with your hard heart. And Jesus paints this picture here. It's the woman who decides where the man goes. From Genesis, as the man leaves his parents to move to his wife, it's the woman who chooses to stay in the marriage. It's the woman who can choose to end the marriage if she chooses to go to another. The woman is becoming a self-acting free agent under Jesus. And in fact, we didn't talk about this last week, but the woman committing what in the Greek is called porneia, and there's a whole study on this word, but it's sexual immorality, and that a woman could commit this. This was a radical thing in Jesus' day. The women of Jesus' day were seen as objects, essentially, with which men committed porneia. This is a man's sin. But Jesus is empowering women to be able to commit porneia. And so here again, Jesus is empowering women as their own sexual being, their own free agent. Jesus continues this female empowerment when the 4 verses in Deuteronomy declare that the divorced and remarried woman has been defiled. That's what it says in Deuteronomy. But Jesus says the women aren't the reason for the divorce. The women aren't defiled. In dumping and remarrying them, in this thing where you can cast them aside and pick up another one, and cast them aside and pick up another one, in this mindset, the men are the ones who are defiling themselves. Jesus leaves the women in a society where they have no power as sinless. The women are sinless and empowered. When Jesus is done, what we saw last week is that man's power of divorce is left empty. What the Pharisees called man's right to send away his wife for any reason that he wanted is reduced to the wife being the empowered agent who gets to decide her own fate. The man's divorce is then simply left to putting into writing what the woman has already chosen. So Jesus has empowered the woman and has emasculated the men. Jesus has flipped the script, and he flips the world upside down, and his disciples, they almost get it, but they don't. This is what Matthew does through his entire book. He uses the disciples as examples of people who are wrestling with things, and very often they don't always get it exactly right. They hear from all of Jesus' words that if marriage emasculates me, if marriage is the setting aside of my male gender authority of being a man, then the answer to keeping power as a man is to not get married. There's the solution. I know I don't have to choose to emasculate myself. I won't get married. In reply, as he said that a married man is an emasculated man, Jesus moves to speak of eunuchs, the literally emasculated. And I love how witty Jesus' words are, how he connects these ideas. Jesus refers to the eunuchs and he says, "For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth. There are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can." That's that key phrase that Jesus uses in various ways to be like, hint, hint. The answer here is not obvious. I want you to think. I want you to grow wisdom. And if you think you found the easy answer on the surface, you probably found the wrong answer. Jesus refers first to the emasculated men who are they're eunuchs due to a defect at birth. Then he refers to the emasculated men who've been made so by force. In case you don't know what a eunuch is exactly, back in the ancient world, we'll keep things PG, but they're essentially emasculated men who were missing the symbol of male power. Their testicles, their virility. They were less than a real man. Eunuchs were the physical form of what the men listening to Jesus believed he said that marriage would make them. Eunuchs are the physical expression of what they're hearing Jesus saying that marriage makes you in society. They were seen as less than men. They were emasculated men, men without the power status. Now, in the physical world, while the eunuch was an emasculated man and not given manly status, the eunuch was also seen as one of the most faithful servants to his master. They were prized for their faithfulness, by which they could serve. They had no marriage and all that comes with that to distract them. They could serve with a single purpose because they had no other purpose in life. So when we hear the word eunuch here, when Jesus speaks of eunuchs, we also need to hear the ones who are prized for their faithfulness. Even more specific, we could say the ones who are prized for their faithfulness due to not retaining their male power. After speaking of the first two types of eunuchs, Jesus speaks of one more eunuch, a third eunuch. Those who have chosen to make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom. This is a sentence that has been discussed over the centuries since Scripture was written. And if we're caught up on just reading things on the surface and holding to easy answers, we can get the idea of a man who he's chosen to castrate himself, somehow for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. So we have to ask ourselves, is this what is contextually in view? And I would say no. Up to the eunuchs, the men in context here, they are emasculated by marriage. They are those who are willing to give up the power that the world affords them by their male gender in order to enter into marriage, where Jesus says, you no longer are the one in power. The woman is an equal free agent to you. So as we read this, we can replace the word eunuchs with the word emasculated. Better yet, we can replace the word eunuch with male power status. So there are those who did not receive male power status in society due to a birth defect. There are those who had their male power status taken away by force. And the third one is those who have chosen to give up their male power status for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. How do you choose to emasculate yourself in the greater context that's in view here? You get married. I want to rephrase this so we can get this. Jesus says that to get married is to give the woman her power as a free agent, power that she doesn't always realize in that current society. Is to give the woman her power as a free agent and therefore to hand over power as a man. The disciples' reaction to this, again, we saw this. The disciples say, wow, if marriage is going to be us giving up our position as a man, if it's going to emasculate us, if marriage is essentially making me a social eunuch, if it's going to make me a eunuch in power status, then let's not get married so we can keep our male power status. It's hard for the disciples to imagine giving up their prestigious role as a man with the authority that it affords them, especially when it also comes with the elevation, when giving up their male status also elevates the woman as an equal human being with equal agency. It's tough. And so Jesus shrugs and he says this in Matthew 19:11. Not everybody can accept what I've said. The marriage is to leave behind the status of male power and female limitation, to then become equally one human with equal agency. Not everyone can accept this, except to whom it's given. And the word given, it means produced. And so, not everyone can accept this, except to whom the ability to accept it has been produced. 4 in the next passage. The word for here also means you see. Not everyone can accept this except those in whom it's been produced. Because you see that there's eunuchs who have been so from birth. There's those who have not had male power status with no choice of their own. It's been by defect. It's been by force. It's been enforced upon them to give up their male power status. But then there's those who can accept my teaching. And they choose to give up male power status by choosing marriage and by choosing to live out marriage like I've just described it. By Jewish understanding, marriage was commanded. And as the Pharisees came to Jesus, divorce had been commanded. Jesus has overturned divorce as a commandment. And he's made marriage a choice. When they say, man, maybe it's better not get married, Jesus is like, not everybody can accept what I'm saying, that marriage is. So if you can't accept it, don't get married. You don't have to. But Jesus does say, and this is why this is one of my favorite interactions with Jesus. And So much more can be explored here, and Jesus continues to flip the script, and he pulls on a thread that we dropped a while back in this idea that the eunuch is an example of faithfulness. The world's example of faithfulness are the unmarried, castrated by the absence of their testicles, men. The kingdom's example of the exemplary faithfulness is the married man who has chosen the emasculation of marriage, which emasculates him and elevates the wife to an equal, and they've given up their male power status. Jesus is saying, if you will leave your male pride behind and be a eunuch by marriage, then you're going to be an example of faithfulness in the kingdom of heaven. This isn't about singleness being worse or better than marriage, but as the disciples have correctly identified, to get married, as Jesus has described it, is to take on something that single people don't have to wrestle with. And so you don't have to get married, but marriage also has its own rewards, but not one is better than the other. They're different. So Jesus leaves it up to his disciples to choose. What do you want? What do you want to do? And he's flipped the script on them. What we need to cover today, though, before we end in the next few minutes, what does this mean for divorce today? This is the hot topic, and I probably would be a bad pastor if we didn't at least go into this a little bit. And so I suppose we need to attempt to clear the muddy waters of today. Before we look at this in brief, I am happy to talk further. When I'm not limited to 20 to 30 minutes here, I'm happy to talk further about a conversation that is an important one in our day. And so we can talk further outside of this. But for today, the bottom line that I want to bring us is this. Make sure he's good. Okay. Thank you, Julie. Jesus has essentially made the divorce decree the instrument by which one party puts in writing that the other party has broken the single unit of marriage. Jesus says you can legally divorce your spouse when your spouse, has already chosen to split or destroy the single unit of marriage. And I believe that there's two clear matters that this breaks down into. The first is often pictured as sexual, but I believe it relates more to intimacy. At some point in a marriage, through sickness, injury, old age, whatever it is, sexual activity, it can get suspended at times. But what keeps the marriage together when the actual sex act is absent? It's the intimacy that two humans hold when they become one human unit. And if a spouse breaks marriage oneness and becomes intimately one with someone else, they pick up their roots from the marriage unit and they go and they become intimately connected to someone else, a divorce decree, Jesus says that's when you can get divorced. And the divorce decree is simply a recognition that the marriage has already been broken. You're not the one breaking the marriage has already been broken. And Jesus doesn't command divorce, though. But while a divorce is commanded, neither is sticking around after being abandoned. The second way that I perceive Jesus' words that speak of an allowance for divorce is in the case of spousal or familial abuse. This can be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, or any combination of these. This case is a bit different because often this marriage doesn't look like the abandonment of a marriage where the spouse goes and becomes intimate with someone else. From the outside, many people can see that everything looks good. By all outward appearances, many look at a marriage where there could be abuse happening, and they say that marriage is still legitimate. The two are one from the way we see things. But Jesus said earlier in Matthew, he said that a kingdom that wars with itself is a divided kingdom. It's two. It's not a single kingdom. The word divided in Greek means it's been cut into two parts. In the situation of abuse, what marriage has sought to make one, the abuser divides then into two, just as if they were to go be intimate with someone else and they divide it into two. They divide the marriage into two when they go to war with their spouse, their victim. They go to war with their victim, the one who should be their partner in oneness. Abuse of the spouse can be direct abuse, abuse of kids, or even abuse of the spouse's family. An abuser splits the marriage, and the abuse victim, for them to get a divorce, it's not their decree of divorce that is dividing the two. The abuser has already separated what God made one by starting a war between what was one. The divorce in both these cases is only an acknowledgement of what the other person has already done. The other person has already broken the marriage. The divorce is only bringing the abandoned or the abused person into the legal status that is in alignment with the reality of what already is. Nate's going to come back here in a second to close us. And as we wait for him, think about how simple this is, right? This is so simple. Not really, sadly. Not really. And I wish it was simple. What divorce level intimacy with someone else other than your spouse looks like will vary from marriage to marriage. Outside of actual physical force or the threat of physical force, which is always abuse, outside of the physical part, what is experienced as abuse can vary by context and person. Disagreements, arguments, two imperfect people, not literally butting heads, but two imperfect people occasionally having conflict, that's not necessarily abuse. But it isn't necessarily not abuse either. It's subjective and it's messy. The waters are still muddy. It's subjective. It's all less, though, than the original intent to harmoniously be one. And we don't have perfect rules for imperfect events. We don't. We don't measure if in our weakness we're doing wrong right. We don't have measurements to know if we're right in how wrong we are. Rather, what this calls us to in this section is to keep our attention on what matters. And where we and others fall short of intent, there is graceful concession. There is graceful concession that God still loves the one who leaves a marriage. There is graceful concession that God still loves the one who divides a marriage. And there's graceful concession for the one who has been abandoned or abused to go ahead and get a divorce and make their legal status match what reality has already become. And as we try to navigate what's cloudy, there's graceful concession to all of us. None of this was intended. It just simply is in our human weakness. As Nate comes up to close us, one of the coolest lessons that I take from this is the lesson of graceful concession. The lesson that wherever we struggle, we can improve. Jesus tells the Pharisees, Moses allowed divorce because your hearts were hard. Past tense. They're not meant to stay hard. But graceful concession will meet us, and it will take us along the journey. I look through my life and I see where graceful concession has been made plenty of times. And I pray that in a loving community, we have graceful concession for each other. That's the way of God, to meet us where we're weak, to meet us where we don't always live up to intent. But it doesn't mean we get wrapped around where we fall short. We keep our eye on what intent is, and we keep getting better. I think it's an amazing, cool God who says, I'll meet you with my graceful concessions until we get you to the intent. Let's worship that God.